This is a movie review. It's the 2019 release, The Irishman, directed by Martin Scorsese. It's from a screenplay by Steven Zalian, and it's based on the book I Heard You Paint Houses by Charles Brandt. The cast, and an impressive one it is. Robert De Niro is the lead character. He plays Frank Sheeran. Al Pacino is Jimmy Hoffa. Joe Pesci plays Russell Bufalino. Harvey Keitel plays mob boss Angelo Bruno. Ray Romano plays Bull Bufalino, son of Russell. Bobby Cannavale plays Skinny Razor, another mob member. Anna Paquin plays the older Peggy Sheeran, daughter of Frank. Stephen Graham, another mob boss, Anthony Tony Provenzano. Stephanie Zuber plays Irene Sheeran, wife of Frank. Jack Houston plays Robert Kennedy. Catherine Narducci plays Carrie Bufalino, wife of Russell's. Jesse Plemons plays Chucky O'Brien, and Dominique Lombardozzi plays Fat Tony Salino, another mob boss. That is the main characters. There are lots of others. It's worth noting the music, which is choreographed by Robbie Robinson, ex of the band, and it's a massive 3.5 hours in length. The movie is a formidable one. It traces the life of Sheeran from the late 40s right up until the beginning of the 21st century, almost 60 years. And in that time we see Sheeran's life change from being a delivery driver of large chunks of meat to an integral member of the mafia, the mob in New York, and become a leader of a branch of the Teamsters Union. In that time, it covers the link between organised crime and politics. We go through significant events that are historically accurate, such as the election of President Kennedy, the Bay of Pigs, the involvement of Cuba, particularly with reference to the rise of Castro and the impact that had on organised crime, the assassination of Kennedy, the life of Jimmy Hoffa, the head of the Teamsters Union. We witness his period of incarceration and his attempts to take control or retake control of the Teamster after his release, and his subsequent disappearance in 1975. So there's a lot of factual detail to cover, but in many ways the film is more about the scenario of age, loss, regret and sin as we witness the events that happen in the life of Sheeran as we go through his story, which is narrated by De Niro, very similar to how he did the same narration in Casino. And of course the movie also was the first time that Scorsese had used De Niro since those heady days of Raging Bull, Goodfellas and Casino, which is over 25 years. Ironically, Scorsese had never worked with Pacino, so this was a first. But of course, he managed to coax out of retirement Joe Pesci given the fact that Pesci's character is a complete contrast to his character in Goodfellas and Casino. Here he's a much more quiet, reassured, but nevertheless controlling mafia boss figure. But you'll be in for a surprise when you see Pesci in his work. It also, because of the amount of time that it covers, it owes a great allegiance to the computer for digitally de-aging the characters. I personally wasn't really affected by this at all, although many viewers and critics alike have said that this computer manipulation of the age of characters takes a great deal away from the enjoyment of the film. I didn't see that at all. I saw all the main characters, the three significant characters, they all look pretty old right from the start, and they got considerably older as we went through to the latter stages of the movie. The movie begins with an opening shot moving through a retirement home, and we locate Frank, who's sitting in a wheelchair, and he then begins to reflect on his life, and we then flash back to the late 40s when he's employed as a van driver delivering meat in a refrigerated lorry, and he comes across and meets Pesci's character Russell on the highway after he's broken down. Russell gives him a few tips on how to restart the vehicle, and a friendship is formed. Shortly after that, he starts carrying out errands and small jobs for Russell, and this is the launching of his long career as a fixer within this New York family, part of the mob. We then slowly move him forward to starting to take on the responsibility of being a hitman. There's an amusing aspect to the introduction of new characters who are mob members, where Scorsese, while shooting the scene, flashes up on screen the date that they died and by what means did they die, to emphasise the fact that these guys were involved in organised crime in one shape or another, and I found that particularly amusing. As I said today, the de-aging technology worked fine for me, and we then get to a point where Russell, who has become almost a father-like figure to Frank, Russell asked Frank if he can be introduced initially and become a sort of minder for Jimmy Hoffa, and at that stage we meet Pacino's character. I have to say that Pacino's performance as Jimmy Hoffa sticks right out there as an Oscar winner. His gusto, his loudness, his self-confidence, his Italian anger, which brings about a hot-headed reaction in a number of situations, was absolutely perfect in the role, in contrast to Frank's very quiet, assured role of a person who does what he's told to do, doesn't involve himself in too much thinking about whether it's right or wrong. Is a perfect sort of soldier for the bosses who decide on the fate of various individuals throughout the film. The violence within the film is contained, really. It's in no way is it a repeat of the severe incidents that we witnessed in both Goodfellas and Casino. However, when we do see it, we're at a sort of distance, but it's quite clinical and quite vicious nevertheless, and it certainly is an aspect of the film that attracts me considerably to gangster type movies, particularly Scorsese's deliverance in this aspect, which I think he's the best in the business, basically. After being introduced to Jimmy Hoffa, the character Jimmy Hoffa, we then get a period within the movie which focuses on those political issues. For example, we learn that the Teamsters Union, which has a massive pension fund, is used by the mob as a sort of lender, and this also is useful in promoting the Democratic Party and getting JFK into power. We also link that in with Castro's Cuba, who have obviously taken away from the mafia a huge market in Havana, and they're not too pleased about losing their influence over there and are determined to try and get it back. We also touch on once the election arrives, we are then faced with the Bay of Pigs issue, which held the world held us all on the edge of our seats, wondering whether there would be a nuclear war. And then, of course, post-election, the appointment of Robert Kennedy as the Attorney General, and he then launches an attempt on bringing all the mafia members to justice, including Hoffa. So Hoffa gets completely up in arms about the fact that he's a target for the FBI and CIA, and eventually he gets placed in prison for 5 years, and the movie then moves towards post JFK, after the assassination, and Hoffa's incarceration. We come across a scenario where he meets fellow mobster Graham, who's brilliantly plays Anthony Provenzano, and they do not hit it off, to say the least, Hoffa and him. And there's a tremendous scene where Provenzano approaches Hoffa and wants him to, through his influence, to get certain favours to release his money in pensions, in his pension, and Hoffa refuses, and a confrontation comes about, and we end up with a brawl on the prison room floor. And this conflict continues once they're both released, and is fundamental, really, in the way that the mob turn against Hoffa and ultimately finger him for being a casualty, and we witness his demise. Frank, meanwhile, working for Hoffa and at the same time being an informer to Russell and the mob, tries to keep a balancing act, staying friendly with both camps. And the film then continues looking at the difficulty he has in trying to keep the two camps apart, as Hoffa is determined to become re-elected chief of the Teamsters Union after his release, even though the mob have taken rather a shine to the deputy who takes over when Hoffa is incarcerated. So we then get a period of time where we witness how Hoffa falls out of favour with most members of the mob, and only has Frank, and to a lesser extent Russell, as supporters of his stance, and it's a very vivid picture that we see of the so-called leading up to the disappearance of Hoffa. Now, the book, which I referred to at the beginning of the film, which was basically an autobiography by Frank Sheeran, states that he was responsible for the killing of Hoffa. We are unable to confirm whether that is a fact or fiction. However, the research, which is shown through Scorsese's directions, would suggest that it's more than likely that this was the reason behind Hoffa's disappearance in 1975, and we witness that final solution to Hoffa's excessive demands to be treated with respect. There's very little involvement with female characters within the film. An early scene when Russell and Frank and their spouses are going on a road trip to a granddaughter's or a family member's wedding. We have incidents where Russell's wife insists on smoking, and Russell is dead against smoking in a car, and it takes on a comedic feel, and there are elements of comedy throughout this 3-hour plus drama, and latterly Hoffa becomes a loved adult by Frank's daughter Peggy. Peggy witnesses as a young small child incidents which she shouldn't have seen, and so she's very wary of her father. But when Hoffa arrives, she warms to him, and following his disappearance, she then suspects her father, correctly as it is, of being responsible. And as an adult, we have a brief appearance by Anna Paquin, which in its own way is a very powerful supporting role. She does not speak at all, but her non-verbal acting is a very powerful influence on the viewer. And but other than that, the females are really not part of this movie. I mentioned earlier about the fact that the movie focused on these issues of age, loss, regret and sin, and that becomes apparent through Frank's narration leading up to the last scenes, when we returned to the retirement home, and his health is continuing to deteriorate. All his friends have all passed on, and he has time to reflect on his life and the decisions that he made, whether he regretted any of them, the friends that he has lost and by how he has lost them, and it's a very poignant message. So overall, this is a 3.5 hour epic. I think it's a wonderful movie. I will watch it again. De Niro's performance, as far as I'm concerned, is a shoo-in for the Oscar. It will of course be his a second Academy Award for lead actor after his role in Raging Bull, and Pacino and Pesci should be in line for the Best Supporting Actor nomination as well. And it goes without saying that Martin Scorsese's direction is another 5-star performance. It's a fantastic piece of work, and I thoroughly recommend you going to see it.